Welcome to the Reach College Podcast with your speaker, Pastor Taylor Gabbert.
Do you only believe that God is providing for you when things go well right away? The problem was always in their own land. So I listen to a lot of history kind of audiobooks. That's kind of my favorite. And mostly they're all centered around war. That's what I'm going to spend my time in the car doing. So I've been listening to one recently that is about the CIA. It's been really interesting. And it's been fascinating to see how much of their history is not very glorious. So one of the things that they talked about in this audiobook that I'm listening to was starting in World War II in the 1940s, they were dropping, the precursor to the CIA was the OSS, and they were dropping OSS agents into Germany. And out of 21 teams they dropped into Germany, only one was ever heard from again. So a pretty staggering failure rate, right? Well then, fast forward to the CIA during the Cold War, and they were doing the same thing in China and in Eastern Europe against the Soviets. Well, they had pretty much the same failure rate. As a matter of fact, China produced a scorecard of agents dropped into their area, and it was something like 212 agents dropped into China, 101 had been killed and 111 had been captured. So 0% success rate. So obviously something's wrong, right? That something about their planning process. It turns out that somebody actually very high ranking in the CIA, like somebody who was having regular breakfasts with the director of the CIA at the time, was actually a Soviet agent and was just passing coordinates of everyone they dropped in. So they were literally dropping people right into the laps of the enemy. And a lot of times the enemy would even take them and then send back, using all their protocols, false reports to get more agents dropped in so they could take those guys, right? So it's just this perpetuating cycle, right? At one point, there was a review being done internally. So a CIA, mid-level administrator is doing an investigation, and he sends a report up to the director that says, we have to push pause. We have to completely reset, and we have to figure out where the problem is, and we have to start this whole process from scratch. The CIA director's response to him was, we can't do that because we can't admit to anyone outside of the CIA that we failed. We have to keep going, even if it's going to cost people their lives, because we can't let it be known that we've been messing this up, right? So he doubles down on what they're doing. Now, you guys have heard me talk about back pocket sins and billboard sins before, right? So I'm going to explain that if you haven't heard me talk about it. So a billboard sin is the sin that you hate in your life. It's the sin that disgusts you about yourself. This is the sin that the enemy wants to point you to. He wants you to see that sin, and he wants you to be just beat down by it, enslaved by it. Well, here's the thing. Why would you keep doing something that you don't want to do? Your billboard sin is always the sin that you wish you could get rid of. So why on earth would that stick around? Well, normally it's because you also have a back pocket sin. And a back pocket sin is a sin that you have justified. It's a sin that you, maybe if you're not being honest with yourself at all and you're not being diligent about your heart work and your time with God, you may not even recognize it's a sin. You've actually justified it so much that if somebody was to point it out to you, you go, no, well, there's nothing wrong with that. I don't understand the problem. Why would that be a sin, right? And why is that a problem? Because getting rid of some sin and not other sin is like trying to separate water in a bowl, right? It's not going to work. It all goes together. And what happens is every time you clean your life out of your billboard sin, you get that out the door and the house looks clean, But your back pocket sin's locked away. It's in the basement. What does it do? It comes out and it lets everything back in. See, I listened to this story about the CIA, and what I realized is that even though they thought the problem was the Soviet Union, they thought the problem was the Chinese and the Russians, but the problem they were having was internal. They had a problem with somebody in the CIA who was disrupting what they were doing, and instead of admitting that there was a problem and starting from scratch, they just doubled down and kept doing the thing that they didn't want to do, which was dropping their agents right into death or capture. Right? So the thing is, in your life, if you haven't figured out how to sacrifice the internal, the justified sin, the back pocket sin, it's going to keep letting that billboard sin attack you and pin you down and make you look foolish. We've been in Judges for some time now. Today, we're going to finish Judges. We're finally done, right? We're going to take 2 weeks off Sunday school, and when we come back, probably going to do a New Testament series, okay? This has been a long trudge through what is the darkest book of the Bible. And I want to remind you really fast a couple of things we've seen. For one thing, one of the things we've seen in Judges is we've seen the cycle. Right? The cycle is they sin, they're oppressed by their sin, they cry out to God because they're remorseful, not repentant of their sin, and God delivers them. And then every time God delivers them, what do? They go sin again. Right? And not only does the cycle happen, but there's a descent of the plot and the story. So understand what I'm saying by that. The plot descent is that they keep getting into deeper sin. They keep getting oppressed longer. They keep getting oppressed by weaker and weaker enemies, showing that they themselves are a weaker and weaker nation. They are becoming more and more like the Canaanites. They're looking more and more like the world around them. And it keeps happening in a progressive downward descent, right? But the other piece of this is that we're also seeing the structure of the story disappear. So in the very first part of Judges, the author, he gives us this dynamic with like these 7 or 8 parts that he's like, this is how the story should go. And then what he does is, as we go through the story, he starts taking pieces of the story away because he's using that not just to show you that the nation, he's trying to emphasize that everything's falling apart. Even the story is falling apart as we read it. So as we walk through, we have now reached the end, the last portion of Judges. There's no longer judges being talked about, right? We're talking about the people, the common people on the ground. And the first thing we saw was this religious failure, people failing to worship Yahweh correctly because they didn't know Him. They didn't know Him well enough to worship Him the way that He should be worshiped. And now, what we did last week was we started a series of moral failings. And we see that the people are not able to treat each other the way that God tells us to treat other people, right? This is the nation of God. They are supposed to love each other the way God loves us. And they are, at this point, completely unable to do that. They are actually acting just like Canaanites in the way that they're fighting and hurting other people. So, as we got into this last portion, we got this refrain. And this refrain is this continued phrase, and it's different versions of the phrase, in those days there was no king in Israel. Everyone did what was right in his own eyes. And that refrain is really the theme for the entire book, which is why we've called this series Kingless. The theme of the book of Judges is how humans act when God is not in charge of us. This is how people act when we're not following Jesus, when we're not submitting ourselves to God and His will for our life and His plan for how we should act. This is what's going on in our hearts. And one of the things that I've urged you guys to see is not to look at some of this behavior and go, wow, glad I'm not like that. But to really look at this and see, wow, I am like that. I see exactly how I behave in those same ways. And that's been the key to Judges, is looking internally at our own hearts and seeing how we actually do these things and what God wants from us as we see that. So we're in this last story, and last week, what did we see? One of the most brutal chapters in the whole Bible. We saw this essentially rape and murder of this woman at the hands of this Benjamite clan. And so now, as we move into chapter 20, all of Israel has been stirred up. There's a problem in the land. Something terrible has happened. And what we're about to see is the comparison between people who are trying to follow the king, trying to follow God, and people who are not. People who don't care, who are doubling down on their sin. But the other thing we're going to see is a picture of internal struggle. I want you guys to look at this story and see what's happening between your spirit and your flesh inside your own life. And I want you to ask this question. What does it look like to follow the king? What does it look like to follow God? The first thing we have to do to follow the king is we have to pick a side. We have to side with the king. So we're in Judges chapter 20, and I'm going to start in verse 1. Then all the sons of Israel, from Dan to Beersheba, including the land of Gilead, came out, and the congregation assembled as one person to the Lord at Mizpah. And the leaders of all the people, all the tribes of Israel, took their stand in the assembly of the people of God, 400,000 foot soldiers who drew the sword. Now the sons of Benjamin heard that the sons of Israel had gone up to Mizpah. And the sons of Israel said, "Tell us, how did this wickedness take place?" So the Levite, the husband of the woman who had been murdered, answered and said, "I came with my concubine to spend the night at Gibeah, which belongs to Benjamin. But the citizens of Gibeah rose up against me and surrounded the house that night, threatening me. They intended to kill me. Instead, they raped my concubine so that she died. And I took hold of my concubine and cut her into pieces and sent her throughout the land of Israel, of Israel's inheritance, for they have committed an outrageous sin and vile act in Israel. Behold, all you sons of Israel, give your response and advice here." Then all the people rose up as one person, saying, "Not one of us will go to his tent, nor will any of us go home. But now this is the thing. This is the thing which we will do to Gibeah. We will go up against it by lot, and we will take 10 men out of every 100 throughout the tribe of Israel, and 100 out of 1,000, and 1,000 out of 10,000 to supply provisions for the people, so that when they came to Gibeah of Benjamin, they may punish them for all the vile sin that they have committed in Israel." So all the men of Israel were gathered against the city, united as one man. Okay. So the first thing we see is a uniting of our priorities and convictions. Let's talk about this for a second. In your life, is there this struggle and this pull between all the things that you know you shouldn't be doing, or even the things that you want to do, but they're not necessarily beneficial, and all the things that we tell you every week at church that you should be doing? I mean, what I want to get at here is this. Until your priorities are straight and your convictions are aligned with those priorities, you haven't picked a side in a way where you can even see victory. Right? If you want to fight sin, do you know what priorities are in line with fighting sin? Being at church. Being at church pretty much every time the door's open. And I'm not saying you have to come every night of the week, but if you're fighting a sin struggle and your priorities are that you're going to go put yourself in a place where that sin is available to you and skip church, what do you think is going to happen? It's not going to get better. You're not going to see victory. See, what we see here in this first portion is that they united as one man. They determined what was important in their life. They said, this is what matters, that we would fight for the Lord, that we would deal with this sin that is among our people, that is in our culture. If you haven't aligned your priorities to say, I read my Bible, I wake up in the morning, or before I go to bed at night, I sit down and I spend time in God's Word. If you haven't made it a priority to be at church, made it a priority to get discipleship, if you haven't aligned those priorities with your struggle against sin, with your convictions, you're not going to see victory. You can't just kind of willy-nilly hope that sin is going to stop trying to get you. In Job, it says that that darkness hungers for us. It chases us. You can't win a war just laying around. It doesn't work like that. So in this moment, we see the people of Israel, they have determined that they're going to eradicate this sin. None of them are going to go home. They're not going to rest until this sin is dealt with. I want to point out to you, there's this moment, one of my favorite moments in the Bible. Elijah, he's on top of Mount Carmel, and he's having this contest between Yahweh and Baal. And he tells the Baal priest, he says, call down fire from heaven. Call down fire from heaven. I'll do it after you. And whoever's God answers with fire, that's who we'll serve and obey, right? Well, the priests of Baal, they spend all day trying to get this fire to come down from heaven. It doesn't work, right? It never comes down because Baal doesn't exist. And then before Elijah prays and before God sends down fire from heaven, one of my favorite lines in the entire Bible is delivered. Elijah stands up before the people and he says, how long will you stagger between the options? And the language he's using is like a drunk person who 1 second is over here and the next second stumbles back over here. And he's saying, if Yahweh is God, then serve Him. And if Baal is God, then serve him. Pick a side. The problem is that some of us in this room, we haven't established that the sin in our lives is never going to bring us fulfillment. It's not real. It can't deliver. And we haven't picked a side to say, I don't care what it takes to get rid of this. I want to serve Yahweh. I want to serve the one true God. We have to pick a side. Look in verse 12. Then the tribes of Israel sent men throughout the entire tribe of Benjamin, saying, what is this wickedness that has taken place among you? Now then, turn over the men, the worthless men who are in Gibeah, so that we may put them to death and remove this wickedness from Israel. But the sons of Benjamin would not listen to the voice of their brothers, the sons of Israel. Instead, the sons of Benjamin gathered from the cities of Gibeah to go out to battle against the sons of Israel. From the cities on that day, the sons of Benjamin were counted 26,000 men who drew the sword, besides the inhabitants of Gibeah, who were counted 700 choice men. Out of all these people, 700 choice men were left-handed. Each one could sling a stone at a hair and not miss. Then the men of Israel beside Benjamin were counted 400,000 men who drew the sword. All of these were men of war. Okay, I want you to see a picture here. We've set the stage, battlefield set, right? We've got two sides. I want you to see two pictures. The first one I want you to see is the external picture. The external picture. There has, throughout church history, been a fight. And that fight is between unity and doctrine. And here's the reality. If we don't understand what we believe, there is no such thing as unity. Right? If everyone in this room comes in and I say, I believe Jesus is the Son of the living God, and a third of you say, yes, got it. And then a third of you are like, I don't know. I kind of think Buddha is really the way to go. And then another third of you are like, well, really Allah is it. And I go, well, as long as we all love each other. That's not unity. It's a false picture. It's the worldly version of love that just says we just got to be kind and just smile. And why does that not cut it? Because whichever 1/3 of us is right, the other 2/3 are in trouble. And so it's not loving to just paste a smile and be like, as long as we don't hurt each other's feelings, because then when we die, 1/3 of us are going to find out that we let the other 2/3 down, right? And so what I need you guys to understand is that in your lifetime, there is a good chance that the church will go through, not physically evergreen, but the church at large will go through another civil war. The church goes through it all the time, and different denominations have gone through it all the time. The Southern Baptist Convention is actually one of the few denominations in the country that won the last one for conservative ideals. And when I say that, I'm not talking about Democrats and Republicans. I'm talking about the fact that the Bible is the one true and perfect Word of God, right? And what you need to understand is if you haven't figured out what you believe, where your convictions stand, and what you hold to, then when those fights come, you'll choose unity over doctrine, and you actually fail to love people when you just paste on a smile and go, well, there's no problem. See, the people of Israel right now, they are determined to eradicate this sin, even at the cost of fighting their own brothers. It's not about just pasting on a smile and going, well, as long as the Benjamites are happy. No, they're going to go to war. They're going to eradicate the problem that is corrupting them from the inside. The second picture I want you to see is the internal one. There's an internal picture of struggle here, and I'm going to read you 2 verses. This is James 1, 6 through 8. But he must ask in faith without any doubting. For the one who doubts is like the surf of the sea, driven and tossed by the wind. For that person ought not to expect that he will receive anything from the Lord, being a double-minded man, unstable in all his ways. And the second one I want to read to you is Ephesians 4:14. As a result, we are no longer to be children, tossed here and there by the waves and carried about by every wind of doctrine, by the trickery of people, by craftiness, in deceitful scheming. Now, I want you guys, I'm going to pause on that word doubt for a second. I want you guys to understand that. That verse is not about just not being in perfect belief at all times, right? Life is hard. It's challenging. We're going to go through seasons where we question things. What this is talking about is not truly believing. This is talking about that Elijah picture of coming over here and going, I know that Jesus thing is good, but I kind of want to do what the world says is fun, what the world says is good. And then coming back over here when that gets tough and be like, God, I need you. I need your help. I need you to do something. And then as soon as everything's nice, well, this looks fun again, right? It's talking about being tossed by the waves of your life to whatever's convenient and easy at the moment, right? And what I want you to see here is that there is a battle going on inside of you. There is a battle between your flesh that has been corrupted in sin, your flesh that you were born enslaved to sin with, and the spirit that's been made alive in you by God. These things are butting heads. These things are fighting constantly. Paul talks about this. He says, I do what I don't want to do, and I don't do what I want to do. You know what the key to that is? If you don't have the living Spirit of God in you, you don't want to do good things. Now that doesn't mean that if you're unsaved, you are automatically the worst you can possibly be and you're just running around just murdering everyone full time, right? It means that your desire is not for the Lord. It means that you don't have the capacity to desire for the Lord. But if you're saved, if you're a Christian, then inside of you, there's something that wants the Lord. It wants holiness, it wants righteousness, but it can't do it. It can't seem to do it because your flesh is always fighting back. It's always dragging you down. There is this headbutting that is happening. A verse that used to scare me to death, and this was part of the reason we went through 1 John, is John says, if you sin, if you live in sin, you're not saved. And you read that and you're like, I sin all the time. Like that's an impossible standard. But you have to understand what John is saying in 1 John. He's saying, if you are choosing to walk in a life of sin, that is not what Christians do. He's not talking about not ever falling flat on your face. You're going to fall flat on your face every day for the rest of your life. That's just the facts. It's not the same, though, as falling flat on your face and crying out to God to give you mercy versus falling flat on your face and then going, no, actually, I want to be here. This is what I want to do. This is who I choose to live as. That's incompatible. See, the problem in your guys' lives is not that you're facing sin. It's not that your spirit and your flesh are at war. That's gonna happen. It's that you fail only when you choose your flesh, when you stay in it, when you live in it, when you love it. That is not compatible with being a child of the living God. So when you look at this picture, I want you to notice something. They couldn't prevent the Benjamites from doing this. They couldn't, it's not that they didn't have a struggle. is that they didn't choose to let it go. And you see, one side is saying, we won't even go back home until we've eradicated this sin. And you see another side that has doubled down, that has chosen to walk in a way that opposes God, that opposes the Lord. See, that CIA story is really about people saying we'd rather continue to fail than admit that we're wrong and eradicate the problem. The question is, are you willing to admit that you have a struggle and let God clean the slate, eradicate the problem, root out the sin? Again, it doesn't mean you'll be perfect, but it does mean you won't walk in evil. There are things you guys need to settle in your own life, in your own ways. It doesn't mean that you'll be perfect. It just means you'll have priorities. It means you'll have set what's important above everything else. So after we choose a side, after we side with the king, we also have to seek the king. We have to look for him. See, seeking God means finding his will. It means obeying, not just when it's hard, but when it's easy. And not just seeking him when it's hard, but also seeking him when it's easy. Right? How many of you seek God really hard in a crisis, and then as soon as things go well, you don't have a quiet time for 6 months? Right? It's about seeking God in and out of the crisis. Right? So look with me at verse 18. Now the sons of Israel set out, went up to Bethel, and inquired of God, and said, Who shall go up first for us to battle against the sons of Benjamin? Then the Lord said, Judah shall go up first. Okay. I want you to notice they know that what they're doing is right. They know that they're in a fight for God against sin. They know that this is the right answer. But what do? They seek God. They seek his will and his direction. There's plenty of times in my life that I've been like, this is generally the right direction and not sinful. I'll just sprint. And then I fall flat on my face in a ditch because I never bothered to say, hey God, how do you want me to do this? How do you want me to go about this? God wants to participate with you. He wants to guide you through what you're doing. And it's not about just saying generally the right direction. It'll be fine. It's about just taking that half second to say, God, I know that this is the right way. I know that this is what you have for me. But how do you want me to do it? How do you want me to go about it? They sought God. And how do you guys seek God? You read your Bible. You pray. You go to church. You get discipled. Right? If you're not committing to these things and being in these places where you're getting poured into, you're not seeking God. You're not actually trying to understand what he has for you. I want you to see the biggest thing in this verse is this. The Israelites understand that even with their overwhelming numbers, they have 400,000 to 26,000. Even with their overwhelming numbers, they can't win without God. And ultimately, winning without God is still losing because you end up somewhere without God. So they start this process by seeking him. Look at verse 19. So the sons of Israel got up in the morning and camped against Gibeah. The men of Israel went to battle against Benjamin, and the men of Israel lined up for battle against them at Gibeah. Then the sons of Benjamin came out of Gibeah and struck to the ground on that day 22,000 men of Israel. But the people of the men of Israel showed themselves courageous and lined up for battle again in the place where they had lined themselves up on the first day. And the sons of Israel went up and wept before the Lord until evening, and inquired of the Lord, saying, Shall we again advance for battle against the sons of my brother Benjamin? And the Lord said, Go up against them. So the sons of Israel came against the sons of Benjamin on the second day. Okay. Here's my next question. Do you only trust God when you see immediate success? Do you only believe that God is providing for you when things go well right away? We can't only obey when it's convenient. We can't only obey just because everything is just flowers and roses and warm fuzzies. It has to be obedience even when it doesn't work. When it doesn't work right off the bat. I don't know what God is doing all the time. And sometimes it looks like I'm putting my face into a brick wall. But if God has told me to do it, I know ultimately He has a plan. He has an outcome. He's going to work it out. What do? They weep in God's presence. Don't raise your hand, but how many of you think that you can't go before God if you're upset, if you're angry, if you're sad, if you don't have everything nice and right, you can't go pray? Listen, what I always tell you guys is this. What you see on the outside, the sin in your life, the emotions that come out, they represent something that's with you internally always. If you're waiting to be clean to go before God, you will never go before God. You don't have what it takes. You can't enter His presence just spotless, right? Unless the name of Christ is on you, the blood of Christ is on you. That is what makes you spotless. But it's not about what your most recent actions look like. It's not, well, today I sinned, so today I can't pray. Or right now I'm angry at God, so I can't pray. Listen, God's not threatened. Like, I always give you guys this example, but it's like if a 2-year-old came in here swinging at me, I'm not going to be like, how dare you, and just waylay this 2-year-old, right? I'm going to be like, oh, this 2-year-old's really angry. That's how God sees your anger. He's not threatened, and He doesn't lash out at you. As a matter of fact, when you come at God angry, He wants to wrap you up and comfort you and love you. So what they do in this moment is that they take their emotion and their distress to God. They go before Him with it. And then notice what they do. They trust God to go back. I can't tell you how many times, myself included, we fail at something that we think God told us to do, and we immediately well, I guess I got it wrong. God must have not told me to do that, so I'm just... Well, what if that's exactly what God told you to do, and He didn't promise you the outcome was going to be roses? Are you going to go back? Are you going to face... Listen, are any of you thinking that sometime in your life, you might have to stand up for something, and it might go poorly? There might be a time in your life where you have to face off with something big. And you can't just crumble because you don't win. Where's our victory? It's in the end. It's when God wins. I don't care if you win the battle right here, right now. God wins the war, and you're a part of that. Sometimes we have to fail. Look in verse 25. And Benjamin went out against them from Gibeah on the second day and struck to the ground again 18,000 men of the sons of Israel. All of these drew the sword. Then all the sons of Israel and all the people went up and came to Bethel, and they wept and remained there before the Lord and fasted that day until evening. And they offered burnt offerings and peace offerings before the Lord. And the sons of Israel inquired of the Lord, for the ark of the covenant of God was there in those days. And Phinehas, the son of Eleazar, Aaron's son, stood before it to minister in those days, saying, Shall I yet again go out to battle against the sons of my brother Benjamin, or shall I stop? And the Lord said, Go up, for tomorrow I will hand them over to you. First, I want to talk about that word fasting. I think sometimes we misunderstand how fasting works. I often don't hear it taught really well. Here's the bottom line of fasting. Fasting is when you take something and you say, the only thing that matters to me right now is hearing from God. So I'm not going to do whatever this other thing is until I hear from God. So normally it's applied to food. So it looks like this. More important than me eating lunch right now is me hearing from God. So instead of eating lunch, the time I would spend eating, I'm going to spend praying. I'm going to spend hearing from God. You know, you can fast with a lot of things. Do you go home every evening and play 3 hours of video games? Well, do you need an answer from God on something? When you go home and you say, more important than me playing video games is that I hear from God right now. So instead of spending 3 hours with my friends online, I'm going to pray. You can do it with sleep. That's what I've done it with. It's more important than me going to sleep right now is spending time with God and hearing His voice. And I will stay up until God talks to me. That's all a fast is. It is just waiting on the Lord and prioritizing spiritual truth and food ahead of physical food, physical sleep, physical wants and desires. It's just saying this is the most important thing. When was the last time you set aside something physical to hear from God? I want you to understand, these people are about to go to battle. It's not a great thing to go to battle and have not ate. Like, they need food. They need energy. They need calories, right? Like this is not a good plan. You don't not eat before you go fight. But they understood that the most important thing, more important than eating food, was to hear from God. I want you to notice this is the big reveal of Judges. He mentions Phinehas. He says, Phinehas, the grandson of Aaron. What does that mean? That means that chronologically, this story starts at the beginning of Judges. Nothing else has happened in the book of Judges when we get this story. See, what you're seeing is you've seen this natural rolling downhill, this story that has been descending, their morality has been disappearing, and you get to this story and you read about a rape and a murder and a civil war and you think, yeah, this looks like the logical conclusion of where we've been headed. And then you find out with one name, this is where we started. The entire book of Judges starts with this story. See, the problem is that what we saw at the beginning of the cycle was this big enemy come in from the outside. This big superpower comes in and conquers them. And then the next enemy, kind of like, they call them like their fat next door neighbors. Like they come in and beat them. So it's like not as impressive. And then the next enemy is the people in the land they should have already killed, the Canaanites, right? And then the next enemy is an Israelite. His name's Abimelech, right? And he's the problem. Here's the problem. Before any of that happens, the real enemy was never external to them. It was always internal. The problem was always in their own land. It was in their inability to erase sin in their own nation amongst their own people. It never had anything to do with anything else going on. See, the problem with us is that we look at our lives and we see the struggles and the trials and the things happening to us, and we go, if that would just stop, if that would just not be the case, then I could really follow God the way I'm supposed to, and I could really be a good Christian, and I could go to church more, and everything would just work out if all these things external to me would stop happening. And I'm going to tell you this, the external enemies are there to shake you up so that you realize something's wrong, but they're not the problem. The problem is what's inside of you. It's the internal civil war between your flesh and your spirit that's dragging you down. You know why God doesn't let the external enemy stop? Because if nothing was wrong on the outside, you would never stop to think about anything being wrong on the inside. He lets the pressure come so that you will examine your life and see that the real enemy is inside. The enemy wants to divide the church. He wants to cut us up from the inside because he can't overwhelm us from the outside. If you know anything about martyrdom and how church persecution works, the church always grows the most when it's being persecuted from the outside. But do you know when churches fall apart? When they divide on the inside. And the enemy knows that tactic works with the church, and he also knows that tactic works with us. He knows that if he can divide us in our priorities and our convictions internally, that we will fall apart. Your only chance is if you are seeking to follow the one true King. Seek Him, and then you'll see Him. See, after we seek the King, we need to be able to see the King. See, in Jeremiah 29 it says that you will find me when you seek me with all of your heart. How many of you understand that God has made a promise to you that He will reveal Himself? See, part of the point of fasting is this. It's saying, God, I don't care how long I have to go without food. I don't care how long I have to go without sleep. I don't care how long I have to go with video games. I don't care what it takes. I want to find You. I want to hear Your voice. I want Your answer. I want to be wherever You're standing. See, when we seek God with all of our heart, when we set aside everything, we'll see Him. We'll find the king. Look at verse 29. So Israel set men in ambush around Gibeah, and the sons of Israel went up against the sons of Benjamin on the third day and lined up against Gibeah as at the other times. When the sons of Benjamin went out against the people, they were lured away from the city, and they began to strike and kill some of the people as at the other times on the roads. One of which goes up to Bethel and the other to Gibeah, and in the field about 30 men of Israel. And the sons of Benjamin said, "They are defeated before us like the first time." But the sons of Israel said, "Let's flee so that we may draw them away from the city to the roads." Then all the men of Israel rose from their place and lined up at Baal Tamar. And the men of Israel in ambush charged from their place from Merageba, when 10,000 choice men from all Israel came against Gibeah. The battle became fierce, but Benjamin did not know the disaster was close to them. And the Lord struck Benjamin before Israel, so that the sons of Israel destroyed 25,100 men of Benjamin that day, all who drew the sword. Okay, I want you to see something. That last verse, it says, the Lord struck Benjamin before Israel. That verse is designed to show you that the credit for this victory is God's credit. This is a miraculous victory. It's a miraculous, God-given overcoming, right? And what we see here is that God, resists the proud and gives grace to the humble. See, the people who've been seeking Him this whole time, they win. And the people who thought, look, we're winning again. We're crushing it. We're undefeatable, right? They're the ones that God resists in this moment. See, the self-reliance of the Benjamites is shown against the reliance of the sons of Israel. The people who depended on the king, who sought Him, see, they see Him right now. The Benjamites didn't see what? They didn't see the disaster that was coming against them. They couldn't see anything. Now, I want you to understand something. 29 through 35 is the description of the battle that shows us that God was responsible. 36 through 48 is a physical explanation of the victory. But I want you to understand something. There is this really, there's this tendency in our culture that actually defies logic to see an explanation for a miracle and then make it unmiraculous. But I need you to understand something. The math doesn't work out. There is no way that the timing in your life is just that perfect all the time. When you begin to look for miracles, you will see God working out things in your life day in and day out in miraculous ways. Do those miraculous ways have no explanation whatsoever? No. But you know what you can't explain? The fact that they keep happening to you. The fact that they are always good. The fact that they are timed perfectly. You know what you really start to not be able to explain is how you prayed about that thing right before that thing happened. It doesn't make sense. So when you see a miracle, it doesn't matter that you can say, well, you know, this happened and that's why. It doesn't have to be that, like, I prayed for food and I watched a loaf of bread, become in midair and, float down to me. That doesn't make it a miracle. I pray for food and somebody goes, hey, I've been thinking about you and I just wanted to give you this food. Well, there's a physical explanation for that food. It's still a miracle. Right? And so what we're going to see is we're going to see an explanation for this miraculous victory. But the reason that the credit was given to God in the verse prior to this is because they're saying this is a miraculous victory given to us by God, and here's what happened. Right? So I want you to see that what we're about to read is the second accounting of the inner details of this battle. Look in verse 36. So the sons of Benjamin saw that they were defeated when the men of Israel gave ground to Benjamin, because they relied on the men in ambush whom they had set up against Gibeah. The men in ambush hurried and rushed against Gibeah, and the men in ambush also deployed and struck all the city with the edge of the sword. Now the agreed sign between the men of Israel and the men in ambush was that they would make a great cloud of smoke rise from the city. Then the men of Israel turned in the battle, and Benjamin began to strike and kill about 30 men of Israel. For they said, undoubtedly, they are defeated before us, as in the first battle. But when the cloud began to rise from the city in the column of smoke, Benjamin looked behind them, and behold, the entire city was going up in smoke to heaven. Then the men of Israel turned, and the men of Benjamin were terrified, for they saw that disaster was close to them. Therefore they turned their backs before the men of Israel to flee in the direction of the wilderness. But the battle overtook them while those who attacked from the cities were annihilating them in the midst of them. They surrounded Benjamin, pursued them without rest, and trampled them down opposite Gibeah toward the east. So 18,000 men of Benjamin fell. All of these were valiant men. The rest turned and fled towards the wilderness to the rock of Rimmon, but they caught 5,000 of them on the roads and overtook them at Gittim, and killed 2,000 of them. So all those of Benjamin who fell that day were 25,000 men who drew the sword. All of these were valiant men. All right, I want you to see something. The key to having these two parallel verses, or the descriptions of the battle. One, God is responsible. And two, they still used their God-given brains to think through the problem. They trusted that God was giving them the victory, so they thought about it. They made a plan. They set an ambush. They had a signal, right? Sometimes we boil down, well, I'm not trusting in God if I have to do anything. And it's like, you're not going to just lay on your couch and all God's blessings are just going to kind of float through your front door. You still have to go and do. You have to be a part of it. You have to participate in it. You have to use your God-given brain. But notice what it says they did. It says that they pursued without rest. Are you pursuing God that intensely? Are you pursuing His will and His victory for your life without rest? Have you put the convictions and priorities of your life at the forefront in a way where you say, even after I fall down, I get back up and I keep laser focus on what God has for me and I chase that truth? Why don't I see victory? Well, it's either a lack of seeking or a lack of obeying. It's one or the other. Sometimes it's both. You have to seek God, and then when you find Him, you have to obey Him. You can't just rock along and be a church attender and just expect everything to just kind of magically work out for you. There's a battle going on inside of you. And if you don't set your priorities and your convictions and pursue the Lord without rest, you won't see victory. We talk about living in the light. That means accountability. That means humility. See, what would the CIA not do? They wouldn't come out of the darkness, right? We know we're fascinated by spy stuff. We're not spy movies and spy shows because it's a game of darkness and shadows. But as soon as they got hemmed up in the darkness, they said, well, we can't tell anybody that we did this wrong. We can't admit to somebody that we failed. And because of that, they were trapped in that failure. That happens to you. If you will humble yourself and say, I'm failing. I'm struggling. You know, everyone in this room is. Part of the lie in your head is like, if I tell people, then they're going to know that I suck. And it's like, yeah, all of us do. No one in this room is just like, I don't know about you guys, but I have this nailed. You know who that is? That's the Pharisees. And if you're the Pharisees, you don't know God to begin with. The key is humility and accountability, living in the light. Now, this story sounds pretty good so far. This is the first story in a while where it does sound good. Look at verse 47 and 48. We're following God. We're seeing the victory. Following the king, right? Look at 47. But 600 men turned and fled towards the wilderness to the rock of Rimmon, and they remained at the rock of Rimmon for 4 months. The men of Israel then turned back against the sons of Benjamin and struck them with the edge of the sword, both the entire city with the cattle and all that they found. They also set on fire all the cities which they had found. Okay, they are eradicating sin. This is what we've been waiting for the whole time. Following God, eradicating sin. The whole country of Israel has united together and attacked a sinful internal problem, and they literally are burning all the cities, the cattle, the people. I mean, they're set on it, right? But we saw that some of the sin escaped, right? Some of the Benjamites made it into the wilderness. They got away, right? We're not going to deep dive 21, but I'm going to sum up to you how the book of Judges ends. See, this story that's this bright shining moment of Israel, even though it's this internal battle, which is its own tragedy, they're finally following God even against one of their own. And you think about how the book of Judges unfolds, this downhill slope, and you think, man, what if they had settled this problem right up front? They had rooted out the evil in the nation. How much different would the book of Judges have been if they were actually following the king, following the righteous king, and they had their priorities set straight? Well, here's what happens. The crisis that we see in 19 and 20 gives way to 21. They've had victory. They've almost completely eradicated the Benjamites. And what do? They're going to spend all of 21 just doing backflips to provide a way for Benjamin to not be a lost tribe, to not be cut out of the inheritance. They made vows that they would not help Benjamin, that they would not stop until Benjamin was defeated. And what they're going to do in 21 is they are going to bend over backwards and they're going to come up with every technicality. Well, we vowed that we wouldn't help them, but if they, if they go steal wives, then, it won't be us breaking our vow, right? I want you to see in this how we act. In crisis, we go find God and we set our priorities and we say, God, I only want you. I need your help. I need your deliverance. And God delivers. And then what do? As soon as we take a breath, whew, man, I'm glad that's over. Well, back to what I was doing. Back to the exact same thing that got me into this mess. Well, it's, I know I promised, but it's different because whatever. It's not different. It's the exact same thing that divides you internally, that you should have rooted out, that you should have eradicated, that begins to drag you down again. Judges becomes a cycle because they couldn't deal with their own internal sin. They couldn't solve the problem internally, so that it begins to go downhill for the rest of the book. And this is literally the last verse in the book. In those days, there was no king in Israel, and everyone did what was right in his own eyes. That's how the book of Judges ends. Now, here's what I want you to hear. This message has this kind of tone that says, do better, try harder. Okay, but let's not get lost. Let's stay in context on the book of Judges. This is Israel trying their hardest without God. I don't care how hard you try. I don't care what you commit to. If you do it without God, you will fail. You can't overcome. You cannot beat the refrain of there was no king, so I did what was best in my eyes, and I failed. Do you know what the gospel is? It's the message that, thank goodness, we don't have to live like the book of Judges. Because we have a king, a righteous king who came to save us and set us free and protect us and deliver us. A king who wants to eradicate the internal sin, the strife and the division in our own hearts. A king that wants to lead us in peace and rest. But you have to side with him. You have to seek him. And you will see him. And if you don't do that, just to say, Lord, I want you. You're the most important thing. You have to do this. Then I don't care, back pocket sin or billboard sin, it's not going away. You're going to keep struggling. You're going to keep being pinned down. You're going to keep being choked out by the world. Why? Because God's not going to let you feel like nothing's wrong when something's terribly wrong. He needs you to see how much you need Him. You cannot overcome sin alone. You need community. You need the Holy Spirit. You need the Word of God. Your sin will crush you without Him. As you walk through your Christmas season, take a minute, pause. During the holidays, you're supposed to have more time, right? What that actually means is lack of routine, which means that none of us accomplish anything. And as you walk through the holidays, I want you to set aside time to seek God, to seek the Lord. And say, I need to hear from you. I need to be following the King.
Hey guys, this is Philip Jackson, pastor to young adults at Evergreen Baptist Church. I want to invite you to come to Reach. We meet every Tuesday night at 7 p.m. at Evergreen Church in South Tulsa, just east of Mingo on 111th Street. The mission of Reach Tulsa is to cultivate a young adult community that's defined by real transformation and the sincere pursuit of a godly life through training in biblical disciplines, personal development, and intentionally transitioning into independence as mature members of the body of Christ. If you enjoyed this episode, please be sure to like and subscribe to our content. We're available on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and wherever you find your favorite podcasts. Reach Young Adult Ministry is a part of Evergreen Baptist Church in Tulsa, Oklahoma. For more information and additional lessons, please visit our website, evergreenbc.org.